Okay, hello everyone, and we are settling in for the third session of this first online LX conference. So thank you all for showing up. This is the first one in this time slot, and we've just determined that this is a magic time slot, 10 o'clock here in Australia. And we've got people in Egypt where it was the afternoon. And then we've also got people joining us from Canada where it's very early in the morning. So this is the time when we can all join up. Great. And we have a special guest or someone that we're relying on today. Of course, we've got Yishay in the room, and I'll introduce him in a minute. But we are also relying on Peppa Pig. Because Yishay's poor daughter has fallen ill, and so she's at home. So I'm sure that we can all understand if anything happens and Yishay just needs to step away for a few minutes, and then Spiros and I will do our best to fill any time that we need to. So, but in the meantime, we're keeping our fingers crossed for Peppa Pig doing the trick. So with that, I'll just do a very quick welcome. It's been a great day already with Kemi and Indy this morning, and what's been really interesting is watching people actually watch the recordings and then live tweet their own watching of the recordings into the conference stream, which has been good, because that's exactly how we wanted it to work. So we're glad that that's a good solution for people to participate asynchronously in the conference. So if you haven't been there yet, you've probably come in through there, but there's lxconf.co.co, our conference website, and then we've got the hashtag LXConf. Now, if you haven't joined any of the Open Studios session yet, we've got another one happening right after this session, and they're really opportunities for us to share other work, because around our 9 big idea speakers, we're also hoping that you will actually share some of the work you are doing, or maybe just some of the work that you've got in progress, or maybe a particular thing that you're working on. We're really keen for people to kind of learn from each other, as well as from the experts that are joining us. So we've got an open studio right after this. You can also share your projects asynchronously by going on the website. You can click Add Project, and you can actually, upload some multimedia and write a bit of a blog post about the work that you're doing. There's 3 already up there. One from some of our colleagues here in Melbourne, one from Spiros, and I think I saw another one that people had shared. So we're hoping to see some more join us. Now, tomorrow, I'm saying tomorrow because it'll be tomorrow for us in Australia. It won't be tomorrow for all of you. But we had the next 2 speakers that will be on will be Dr. Jess Nutt, who will be joining us from Michigan, and Perrin Rowland, who will be joining us from Auckland in New Zealand. And then about 24 hours from now, it'll be me who will be up. Remember that we've also got some social spaces for everyone to share things. We've got hallways, and we're actually looking at opening up a lounge as well, so keep your eyes open for that. And then finally, batch fever is definitely hitting fever pitch. And everyone's been creating their own conference badges, and we are just about to award one of our prizes from Rosenfeld Media, one of the ebooks about UX. So you can be looking out for that. If you still want to get your badge in, you can. We'll be issuing the first prizes tomorrow morning. Okay, with that, we're going to move into our big idea sessions. So by now, most of you will probably be familiar with how these run, but basically all sessions have the opportunity for you to post some questions on the speaker page before the session starts. And I've just checked, and we haven't got any for Yishay's session. So we're hoping that that you'll pop some into the chat as Yishay begins his presentation. And then Yishay is going to talk for about 40 minutes, and then there'll be time for about 20 minutes to do a Q&A, which Spiros will actually be facilitating. And then after the session is over, of course, you can continue to talk in the hallways, in the lounge, on Twitter, and we will also be uploading the slides and the recordings, and they will go on the speaker page. Okay, so with that, I will do my introductions and then it will be over to Yishay. So Dr. Yishay Moore is the head of Center for Innovation and Excellence in Teaching at the Levinsky College of Education in Tel Aviv, Israel. And before that, he was an independent consultant working in Barcelona. Oh my God, I so love Barcelona. And if the name sounds familiar, then that's probably because you might have heard him from the Open Learning Design Studio MOOC, which quite a few of us will have participated in. And he's also written extensively about the design of MOOCs and beyond. And I was last year, Yishay and I had a bit of an exchange because there might be an opportunity for us to work together, and it didn't happen then. But when I started to think about this conference, he immediately sprang to mind as one of the designers that I look up to, and of course I've had a sneak preview of his slides, and so I really can't wait to learn from him today. So with that, Yishay, I'm going to give you your speaker privileges. I'm just going to switch over to your slides. There they are. Okay, and I'm going to give you your speaker privileges, and you will be on. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so hi again, everybody. And well, thanks for the introduction, Joyce. So I'll just dive straight in. And let's start with a poem, just to see who's with me. So when you think about learning experience design, do you see it as a craft, as an art, as a science, all of the above, or something else? All of the above seems to be kind of taking a strong lead here. Okay, we'll give this, it's a nice tool, this poll. So I see 10 of you are still hesitating. Give this another 30 seconds. And yeah, come on, everybody, please vote. Okay. I think we'll close the poll at 18 votes, so you can see the results here. So, well, it looks like most of you are kind of on the same page here, and that's pretty much the same page that I am looking at Alex design as a mixture of craft, art, and science. And it's interesting reflecting on the talks that you had yesterday, where Indy perhaps gave more of the craft of design perspective, and Kevin gave more of the science side. And one of the problems is that sometimes you feel like these are parallel conversations, that we don't have enough kind of exchange between all the different discourses and approaches. I'm going to talk just a little bit about myself so you know where I'm coming from. I'm going to give you a few, at least my perspective of what I see as how I understand design, how I understand learned design and design research, and then kind of share a few tales that I think a few of you have been actually part to these tales if you've been through Old MOOC or one of these other events I'm going to tell about. So do chip in through the chat, and then hopefully give you something to play with after the session. So yeah, this is I wanted to make this a kind of more kind of interactive slide, but limitations of the medium. So I'll just kind of, maybe you can see my cursor. I started my career as a computer scientist. I did a master's in computer science at the Hebrew University. Joined a startup, which is, don't look up that URL because it's now owned by somebody else. So that was a very interesting startup, but as most startups go, it perhaps preceded its time and dithered away. I then spent a few years as a consultant, kind of IT or computer science consultant. Then later and Cisco systems. And all along the way, there was kind of an undertone of education that interested me. So at some point I said, right, you know what, maybe I'll turn my hobby into my vocation. And I joined a research project which was called Web Labs, which was led by the London Professor Richard Norris and COOs at the London Knowledge Lab. But I did a PhD, then got first academic job at Haifa at the Technologies Education Program, moved on to a second job at the IET, Open University, and then another stint of consulting and working with Power Education, and now I'm here at Levinsky. So this is just to give you, the main point here, very non-linear. Hope there's a lot of non-linear people in the audience, because, otherwise, I mean, I hope you'll appreciate how my ideas develop better if you kind of understand that there's all these kind of non-linear convergences in the background. So let's talk a bit about learning design or learning experience design. And let's break it up into, there are three words here, right? There's learning, experience, and design. Now, what do we talk about? What's learning? Can somebody, I don't know, type a definition of learning in the chat box? Okay, there's a dare for you. You can type a 5-word definition of learning. Wendy, maybe you would dare. Inner transformation. I like that one. Is it always change of behavior? So it's interesting because Jill says inner transformation, right? So that's something changing inside, not necessarily having external effects. Tamara says change of behavior, which is all about the external effect, and not necessarily saying something about the inner side, right? Changing the way we interpret information. That's so acquisition of skills and knowledge. Yeah, these are kind of, and I think, it'd be good if actually instead of just a chat, if we had, a concept mapping tool, because I think all of these are correct, but they're all bits of the bigger picture, right? So yes, it could be acquisition and application of new skills and knowledge, but it could also be internal change, or it could be change. And I like growth, Maha. Growth really takes me back to Dewey. So also we can talk about learning as a social phenomenon. So it's a change of discourse, right? It's not just inner, it's not just be individual, but it's something that involves other people. And I just started, I think the main issue about learning is we're talking about change. And, I just started an ABC here, right? So we can talk about change of awareness. I'm certainly aware of some need or some aspect of the world that I wasn't aware of. I might change my attitude, I might change my belief, might build up some confidence, I might change a discourse, all the way down to, for Z, I took Zeitgeist, right? So there's a lot of different things we might think of when we want somebody to learn, but it's all about change, right? Now, what about design? Let's play the same game with design. I hope this chat stream is part of the recording. I don't know if somebody can then do some content analysis about it, So, come on. The 5-word definition of design. Who's with me? A cunning plan. Oh, so that design is not a verb, an adjective, right? Design object, not the process of design. Whereas Mala says creating structure and systems for a purpose function. Yeah, so you're talking about the creative process, right? Purposeful creation. Okay, purpose. I think, Luke, you probably picked that up from Indy yesterday, right? How it works. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Purposeful positioning. So that's kind of the the orchestration, making something that. Yeah. Okay. So I'll give you a few. Oh, hey. Yeah. Well, I can run a poll on this now because Big Blue Button identifies the ABC. So let's see who identifies with these definitions. So design as conversations of materials of the situation, design as changing existing states of the world into desired ones, design as turning matters of fact into matters of concern, or design as creating objects with intent. Right. Okay, voting going on here pretty quickly. Yeah, I'll give it another 30 seconds. Yeah. So object with intent seems to be a winner this time. Now, bonus question, who can identify, these are all quotes as a matter of fact. Who can identify where these come from? Any? No, you can Google it, come on. Okay. Dewey's not, no, Dewey didn't actually talk that much about design as much as I know, right? I mean, other people refer to Dewey, but when like I refer to Dewey when I talk about design, a lot of other people have, but I don't think he talked about it as much. Well, do you want me? Okay, I'll maybe come back to that later, or maybe you can just Google these. No, okay, I'll give you the. So the first one, conversation with a material situation, that's Donald Schoon. That's right. Existing states of mind into desired ones, that's Herbert Simon. Turning matters of fact into matters of concern, that's Bruno Latour. And creating objects with intent, that's John Hockenberry in a very nice TED Talk. So, yeah, so we have Latour, and like I said, Schoon, Simon, Latour, Hockenberry. Okay, moving on. So I like to, ooh, yeah, I really messed up this one, didn't I, Maha? Huh? I'm sure there are, and yeah, that's one that I need to brush up on. Okay, fair point. So I like to kind of take this as a sort of soundbite. Design as making things better, which kind of captures, I think, a lot of those definitions. About experience, so here comes Dewey, and Dewey talks a lot about experience and knowledge, and the idea that, well, basically we learn through experience, but that does not mean, as the quote said, that all experience are genuinely or equally educative. So that's a difference in a way between just going through life and learning and education, whereas somebody designs an experience with the intent of us learning something, right? So if you take that understanding of learning as a change and design as making things better, as putting intent, or your intent, other people's intent, so that's where it all comes together. So that's my kind of perspective on learning design, learning experience design. Just to note, there's a long history to learning design, and I think the focus on learning experience design sort of brings a fresh voice into this conversation, bringing in all these sort of UX perspective, and so for instance, empathy and so on. But it's I think it's good to kind of have that historic perspective. I won't go into this today, but this is from the Larnaca Declaration, James DL's project, and there's kind of a timeline there. There's also book and special issue that I was one of the editors of, so you can get the kind of historical perspective there. Let's talk a bit about education design research, right? Also known as design-based research. So how many people here are, let's see if I can do this quickly. Just a yes, no quiz. Are you familiar with education design research or design-based research? Okay, so I'll stop here. So it's a mix, right? I mean, some people are fairly familiar, some less so, some not at all. I won't, this again, we don't have a time for a course on education design research, but I just want to give the essence. And the sort of the basic pretext here is education is a messy business. It's complex, it's dynamic, it's intersubjective in the sense that it deals with the sort of the interaction between human experiences. So that kind of seems to say, all this kind of quantitative stuff, all this sort of, big data stuff, well, it doesn't really capture how my experience interacts with your experience as a human. And so there's the argument that the current scientific paradigms fail to capture the essence of education or answer its critical questions. Now, this is quite a provocative statement, but hey, we're here for provocation, right? So what's the alternative to this? And the alternative is to take the ideas of design and turn them into a research paradigm. So, and just we were chatting before the session started about, the ideas from the previous session, how design isn't, it's not a one-way channel. You design something, you put it out in the world. What you design actually encompasses some beliefs or conjectures you have on the world. So putting that object out there is a way of testing your conjectures, right? But once you put it out there, you've changed the world. So what you're looking at after you put the object of your design or the output of your design in the world is not the same world you had beforehand, right? So therefore, you have to iterate and you have to always be, very attentive and listen to the situation with which you're interacting. So again, going back to Shun's idea of a conversation with the materials of a situation, this inquiry process or this research process is a continuous dialogue between the designer / researcher and the environment, right? Just to kind of position design science, versus other paradigms. So natural science tries to give us answer what is, kind of give us an ontology of the world, right? Explain the world around us. Whereas, well, social science tells us how bad it is. So social science, we go and use various observational or analytical methods to look at the social world and criticize it, right? Design science is about how to make it better. And that for me, when we said design is about making things better, design science is about a rigorous process that asks questions of how do I make it better? Now, the question, of course, is what is better? So here we still need humanities, we still need philosophy, we still need ethics, we still need a lot, and we need to have a position of what is good and bad, what is better. And that's kind of one of the things that characterizes design science, is that it's situated in the real world, where we can't study the world of human behavior, of human phenomenology in the lab. We have to be situated in the real world. It's iterative, because I said there's, I put something in the world and it changes the world, and I go back to that. And it's value driven in the sense that, I have some initial stance about what is good and bad, what is better, and I'm trying to promote what I think is better. So that's change oriented. Representation sensitive, in the sense that, if we're talking about humans' perception and experience of the world, it depends on how things are presented. And it's eclectic in the choice of research methods. So in design science, I will use quantitative methods, qualitative methods, narrative methods, ethnographic methods, whatever, whatever does the job. Okay, we can disagree, Maha, and we'll have to pick that up on Twitter or somewhere, or maybe in the virtual connecting session. And there's there's a link there to, what's that, Bron? Is that a course on DBR, or anyway? I think there's a lot of follow-up to do for this conversation. I see there's also stuff popping up on the Twitter feeds, and maybe comments on the web page, but I'll focus on the presentation, right? So this is from and I'm way behind on time, so I better pick up speed now. This is just from one of my papers, and it's my fault, I don't even remember which one, so you'll have to look it up. But this is kind of some model of the cycles of design-based research. But I'll move on, because we need to get it going. And there's some reading lists, and the slides are up there on the web, so you can find these and follow up later, or continue the discussion on the website. So now the problem here is, we're talking about design from different perspectives. Usually, whether it's actual learning design projects, big project, or design-based research projects, they involve people with different roles, and these people come with different agendas, different discourse. It's very hard to communicate across these spheres, and that's one of the issues that's been kind of bothering me over the last, I don't know, 10 years or so, right? So I'll now move on to a few stories from stations along the way, which helped me shape the way I approach this problem of kind of creating a discourse across disciplines, across perspective. And I'll start with Web Labs. So Web Labs, like I said, was a project that we ran from the London Knowledge Lab. And it was about using essentially technology in math and science education. And we came up with these really nice ideas. We had a web-based collaboration system, and we had sort of like a video game type programming system, and kids could program stuff in this system and then upload them into the web. And we use this to build these games. So there's one game where kids will build what we call the robot, right, which is the term for a piece of code in this in ToonTalk, the system we were using. They'll build a robot that generates a sequence of numbers, and then posts that sequence of number to a web as a challenge, as a riddle, and say, okay, let's see you build a robot that creates the same sequence of numbers. And this led to really interesting mathematical conversations about, you have two robots producing the same sequence of numbers. Are they the same sequence? Are they equivalent? Are they equal? And so on. So this was going really well, but thinking, okay, but what do I tell the world about this? Do I tell them you need to use this system and this activity? No, we're trying to distill some generalizable, transferable design knowledge from this experience. So this is where my kind of history is computer scientists came in and I said, well, when we figure out a good way to design something in computer science or a piece of code, we capture that as a design pattern. So maybe I can use the same structure of design patterns for encoding educational design knowledge. And if you're not familiar with design patterns, they come from a theory of architecture. So Christopher Alexander, who in the 70s came up with these books of pattern language, and there are a couple of other books. And the idea was that, as Christopher Alexander says, each pattern describes a problem that occurs over and over again in our environment and describes the core of a solution to that problem. So there's this triad of context, problem, and solution. And I thought, well, hey, I can use this structure also to say, okay, in this particular education context, here's a problem you can encounter, and here's a solution. So if we take this story that I told you about, the robots and the webs and the challenges, I can encode that as a pattern which I called Guess My X. And the idea is that you have a social learning environment that's mediated by some conversational technology, and you create a game where one player proposes a challenge, which he does it by taking a process and building a process and capturing the output, the product of that process, sharing that product, and then a responder tries to reverse engineer the process from the product and puts it back as its response, and this leads to a conversation between the two. Right now, if you think of it, there's a lot of educational challenges that relate to being able to understand the relationship between process and product. So this pattern could be applied in a variety of contexts, but there are some basic qualities of those contexts which would still need to come across, right? Here's and yeah, so we came out with a book, and then turned out there was another very serious project called the Pedagogical Patterns Project. They came up with a book as well. So you can read all about it. Here's another example of a pattern. This is from a later project, okay, again, time's moving, so I won't go deeply into this, but again, this is about actually online environments where you want to retain the sort of conversational quality of a small class. And so the solution is that you do it by creating what we call a fishbowl. And this is something we did quite a lot in old MOOC and other MOOCs. So you create a sort of the more interactive sense of having a conversation between the different participant, whether the facilitator or leader in the session and the students, by this fishbowl pattern. Again, move on. So you can look up more recent pattern projects. There's eduplop.org, and there's the MOOC design project, and you can eduplop we had a workshop just this autumn, and Maha was with us remotely, which is really great. So moving on, but there's a problem with patterns. First, what's a kind of base data from which you generate the patterns? And another problem which I realized just when I was preparing for this talk and looking at Indy's talk from yesterday, is that, again, in generalizing and abstracting away from the individual, there's a risk of losing empathy. So how do we compensate for that? How do we complement the patterns with some representation that would, first of all, give us a base data from which to draw the patterns, also give us the examples that illustrate the patterns and retain that sense of empathy? And here I I referred to Jerome Bruner, who talks about narrative as a way of transforming experience into meaning. So I said, okay, so the sort of base data that from which design patterns should be built or design narratives. I also included an image of brain scans here, just so you know that I'm talking science. This is a rule you should always adhere to in presentations. If you want to convince people that you're talking science, show brain scans. But also there's really, that was a joke. Have you all gone to sleep? Anyway, thank you, Wendy. Appreciate that. Okay, but seriously, there is neurological evidence for Bruner's theories. So you can look up that particular article or others. We do use narrative as a way of constructing meaning out of experience. So eventually this led to this framework, which we call SNAP, that go through the first concept, which is design narrative, the transform to design patterns, transform to design scenarios, which are kind of future narratives. So posing our conjectures about what will happen if we design this in a narrative form. And again, I think the narrative here connects very well to the idea of empathy. So I think there's a thread here to explore. Connecting this talk with indies, but this is something that's just kind of formulated in my head, like I said, over the last 2 days. So move on. So we started running these participatory. I mean, I did this work. The SNAP kind of model came out of my PhD, and then we developed this as a sort of the research method, and various projects where we ran these participatory pattern workshops. So the idea of extracting design knowledge from a community by leading them through this process of articulating their design narratives, then transforming these into design patterns, and then formulating conjectures in the form of design scenarios. And there's a sort of a set of patterns that emerge, and we actually formulated the methodology itself as a set of patterns. So for instance, one of the problems is that we want people to tell a story, but we don't want to turn it into a therapy session. So we need to somehow keep people, give people the sort of the freedom to actually tell the story without confining them too much. And so we came up with this 3 hats pattern. The idea is that one person tells a story, another person interrogates him and makes sure he stays on track, and a third person takes notes, and then the guy that took notes retells the story to another audience. So this is kind of an example of one element of that participatory pattern workshop methodology. And that methodology was really, again, taking those ideas of narratives, patterns, scenarios, and turning them into a research frame. And okay, you can look up the publications. So I'll move on unless there's any quick questions at this point. Yes, no. Okay, I'll move on then. I said, and there's the book that came out of those, and the MOOC design project is one example of an output of such a process, and there's a special issue of e-learning papers that also came out. But all this was still very much in a kind of scientific domain, and one of the things that we hear quite a lot in educational research, education design research, technology enhanced education research is that, there's so many pilots, but the plane isn't lifting up, right? So, okay, Joyce, you have a question, yes. Joyce, question?
No, I was just saying my Hebrew was letting me down.
Yeah, well, this is just an illustration, right? So what I wanted to say, what I was going to tell is that, you know, I started thinking about how do I translate these ideas into something that's relevant for practitioners. Joyce? Yeah, thanks. And that's where I started thinking, okay, how can I use these ideas in training teachers? So this is an example of a course I ran on mobile learning, and yes, it was in Haifa, and that's why it's in the site was in Hebrew. But essentially, I was taking the same ideas, the same process. Oh, that's my cue, right, Spirits? Okay, and translating into a practical way of training teachers. And this was also expressed in the old MOOC and in the hands-on ICT MOOC. So I'll just briefly go through the idea, the sort of what I call this design inquiry of learning cycle. The idea is that you start from imagining the educational challenge that you want to address. So what is a change you want to see, right? And then as with any kind of inquiry learning paradigm, you start from investigating the context, refining the challenge, investigating what's already known. So you do some desk research, some field research, you look at examples to draw inspiration, but then you ideate and prototype and test those ideas, you know, so you evaluate them and finally reflect with your peers. So essentially you're going through one cycle of a design science project within the constraints of a practical setting. So, you know, you'll reduce the methods to what's feasible within the constraints of a practical setting. And here are some of the tools that we used in some of the representations we used in these projects. So we would build personas of the sort of learners that we're targeting. Again, personas are a great tool for developing empathy. We even tried empathy maps once or twice. We would look at the transition. So you think about, you tell a story in the voice of your learner saying, you know, before this course, here's where I was. Now, after I finished the course, here's where I am. Here are things that helped me. Here are things that stood in my way. So again, that's another tool that's designed to help you develop an empathic position and actually express a design conjecture in a way that's both intuitive but has some rigor to it. Force maps, another representation we use to try and get a sort of picture of the context. I think I'm really going over time here. So, you know, I guess we'll need to kind of maybe come back to this some other time. But you know, this was a tool we used to map the designer intents, get people clear on what it is they want to change. If you want to change attention, passion, knowledge, action, remember, learning is about change. What do you want to change? And finally, storyboard. And there is on the Learning Design Grid, there's a whole page on storyboards. Storyboards are again a great tool that comes from theater, from UX design, but has been adopted in the learning design world. And I'm not the only one doing storyboards. So again, look at that page on the LD grid, and you'll see other people doing storyboards. So yeah, you know, lots of MOOCs, lots of courses, lots of workshops, lots of papers. And to kind of recap, so a few things to take away. There's a METIS project, which captured some of these workshop methodology and the resources. There's the ILD environment, which is a learning design environment that encapsulates a lot of these representations. And there's a MOOCs and Co. Design kit, which is Creative Commons, so you can all use these tools. Yes, link for the learning design kit. So here's links for for all the stuff. There's a link to my page on the Learning Design Studio, and a link to the hands-on toolkit, and a link to the link to the MOOCs and Code toolkit is in on the previous slide, right? Yeah, there it is. So hopefully, you know, these, and old MOOC is still, all the content is out there, and you know, you don't even need to register. It's just a website that you can go through the content. So thanks.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Yishay. Thank you so much for that very provoking, non-linear presentation. And I must say, I think Peppa Pig came through for us there, so that's terrific. I'm going to open it up for some questions, because we do have some time, obviously, and to continue the conversation. So please feel free to use your mic or write up in the chat.
So Dan, I'd like to, since you've all, and also I saw there's a few questions on the page, so Spirits, if you can also bring in questions from there. I'll relate to Dan's question. So design patterns are specific. Now, I didn't get, there's actually an extension of this framework which talks about, because there's a sort of a stream of work on design principles. And on the other hand, there's the work that me and other people have been doing on design patterns. And I tried to look where these things fit together. And the way I see it is that design principles kind of come from theory towards practice, and design patterns come from practice toward theory. So by nature, design principles start as a very kind of general high level, and then you kind of drill down to the specific, whereas design patterns start from the specific and then build up to the more general. But if you look at pattern languages, a lot of times they will have kind of a hierarchy, network of patterns at different levels of abstraction or specificity. I hope that answers the question or relates to it in some way. Okay, good.
Yishay, you also talked about a little bit, as some more questions come through, just on patterns in relation to you feeling that it was difficult to, empathy sort of was removed as patterns went on or were used and reused. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because it's something I've experienced in the work of use of patterns.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, empathy is a lot about putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, right? Or in somebody else's mind. And the problem is we can't put ourselves in the mind of a crowd. So whenever, I talk about a context which has some generality to it, it's not about a single person or a very specific event. It's very hard for me to put myself in that position as a person. So it's very hard for me to adopt an empathic position when I'm abstracted even one step away from reality. And that's where narratives come in. So narratives retain that personal quality. There's also the other, that's why all these representations of personas, transition matrices, and so on, the idea is, and when I tell people to create a transition matrix, I say, tell it in the voice of the learner. Don't say the learner is in this position before the course and this position after, but say, I was here and now I'm there, right? So really speak in the voice of the learner. That I think that we need to retain that that ability to abstract and to generalize, but also kind of sustain the link to the individual. I think also patterns have a potential of connecting design and design thinking and data, because I can start with individual user stories or design narratives, build them into patterns, and then validate those patterns using data. Right?
Yishay, we have another question from Natasha, who asks, again, on the theme of design patterns, how do you see them evolving in the future?
Yeah. So one way I see them evolving in the future is exactly what I said now about using them as kind of a boundary object between the sort of the learning theory and the phenomenology of learning and data approaches. So I can derive a pattern from, or I can derive a design principle from theory. I can derive a design pattern from my own observations and my own experience, and then validate it using data. And I think that would be a very, very, very powerful development. And I know some people who are working in that direction. I think another question is, design patterns and pedagogical patterns specifically have been around for quite some time, and yet they haven't really broken into the mainstream. So there's still a challenge of how do we kind of make these ideas and the representations accessible to a wider audience. I'm not sure I have an answer to that, but I'm sure that the answer will eventually present itself.
We also have a question from Alicia, which is a good one I hadn't thought of before. But she talks about the diverse disciplines in UX, UI, LX, etc., and design. And do you see as particular skills or LX designers needing to add to their repertoire to work in this environment?
I think it's a very good question, because I think we just have to acknowledge the limits of our capacity. So you can't be an expert in everything. You have to be able to identify what you don't know, and then be able to have an open conversation with people who do know, right? So take UI as an example. I mean, if you're building some, whatever kind of blended hybrid system that you're designing will have a UI element for it, right? We can't all be UI experts, but you can pick up some basic principles and you can know when to seek help. By the way, one of the ways design patterns are used a lot in UI design and UX design as a way of encapsulating design knowledge. So one of the ways that if you recognize that you need to bring in some UX or some UI, so find a book or a resource that has a good collection of design patterns, which is a way of kind of picking up generations of knowledge and just using it as a tool. There was another, Joshua was asking about, I think he's asking about the intents tool, right? The design intents. And this, I mean, in the MOOCs and Co kit, there's, you can actually see the way we use this. So we had these cards, and you would say, okay, what is it I want to change? Is it an issue of attention? Is it an issue of motivation or passion? And write down, okay, in terms of attention, I want to change this. In terms of passion, I want to change this. It's not necessarily that every learning experience has to cover all of these dimensions. I think it's a good way of organizing what it is you want to achieve as a designer. And then the next exercise would be to look through a set of what I call instruments, and think, okay, what are the right instruments for achieving this intent? So, putting a kind of a 30-second clip on YouTube might be a good way to capture somebody's attention. It's probably not going to change their habits, right? So matching instruments to your intents is, I think, a good exercise as a designer. And that's sometimes something we usually do before we go into storyboarding.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
There's another question here from the Alex conference team in relation to tacit knowledge and its development, particularly in our field of Alex design. Following on from Alicia's question.
Well, I think tacit knowledge, and that's also, in a way, something that goes back to Donald Schoon. He talks about design knowledge as being inherently tacit. So I think tacit, exactly, Maha. That's it, experience. So through experience, you build your intuitions, you build your sort of inner know-how, right? And that's your tacit knowledge. The problem is that, we don't have time for apprenticeship learning, in a sense. We need to spread knowledge much quicker because the world is changing very fast. So we need a way of making that tacit knowledge explicit, putting it in a sort of a space of critical discourse, and then spreading it. And that's where we need representations. And that's where, if you look at the kind of the history of research and learning design, then, out of the sort of the three kind of main strands, one of them is about representations of learning design, right? Because we need a way of making that tacit knowledge explicit and critiquing it and sharing it.
Yishay, if there aren't any further questions, we're just almost spot on time here. I was going to say 4 p.m., but that's what it is here in Greece. Thank you again so much for that provoking presentation, and I think it sort of really wedded well with some of the other presenters we've already had with Indy and Kimi, and came from a very different angle. Really liked the use of the polling as well initially, and what we'll try and do is capture some of that in the threads and see if we can do a bit of a cloud map and mind map of some of that, and share that on the site. Please keep the conversations going in the site, and we'll be logging on to the Open Studio session straight after this one. Again, a round of applause, or virtual applause, for Yishay, please, everyone. And again, and I know it was a tough day with your little girl, so we really appreciate you making the effort and giving us your presentation and your thoughts, which we will be uploading in about an hour's time on the site, together with the slides. So thanks again. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank the team. I mean, it's been a great experience, and great audience, and yeah, continue the conversation on all the social spaces, and yeah, be with you. Thanks. Bye.
Yep. Thanks. And for those, don't forget, tomorrow we have Dr. Jess Knott and Perrin Rowland, as well as Joyce, who will be sharing some of her toolkit on some of the questions that came up earlier today on that multidisciplinary nature of facilitation, whether it's UX or LX design. So stay tuned for that. Don't forget to get into the whole hallways. Look out for the lounge. The badge fever, yes, I think we'll be calling out a winner soon on that one. And the Open Studios will be live in the next couple of minutes. I think I've covered everything. Thanks again, and thank you, Yishay. And please log off so we